Shalom, shalom, everybody. Here we are in Adult Ed on Tuesday night again, going through the book of Enoch. And so we're going to continue with that again tonight. Tonight is going to be another one of those nights like last week where we're talking about the luminaries. And, you know, it's kind of hard to glean some good information out of it because it's difficult to understand. But there are some little tidbits here and there, so that's why we don't skip that entire section. We go through it. And then once we get through all the luminary stuff, there's a lot more very interesting things to come up. So when we've been talking about the luminaries, you know, we talk about the different terms that are used, like portals, gates, parts. And one thing we found out that there are 18 parts in a day. The terms that Enoch used, you know, they didn't have hours back then. So 18 parts in a day. So you divide that into 24 hours, that's about 1.33 hours for every part. So that's the terminology that Enoch uses, parts. But today, you know, here we call it hours, 24 hours in a day. But Enoch's time, they were called parts. But also, quite often he'll use the word mornings, which it would be a day. So you'll see that 30 mornings, that would basically be 30 days. So you see little clues that he talks about. And so we deal with that. So on page 154, verse 23 in your books, if you turn to that, page 154, verse 23, we'll start there. Verse 23 says, "And the sun rises from that third portal and sets in the third portal in the west, returns to the east. For 30 mornings rise in the second portal in the east, and like manner sets in the second portal in the west of the heavens." See, that can get kind of confusing after a while reading about all these things, so it's kind of tough. But all portals it's the different angles the sun rises and sets at a central location. And the central location would probably be the land of Israel, I guess. We don't know for sure because Enoch was before the land of Israel. And so we just have to assume that it was in the center of the earth, which is where Jerusalem would be. And that from that point, he's measuring out the portals at that point. Because you have to stop and think about it for a moment, you know. The portals in Alaska would be totally different than the portals wherever Enoch is at. You know, there are times in Alaska where you don't get an hour of daylight in the 24-hour period. So we know that the equinox, where just as many hours of day as there is of night, is an equinox. And everybody understands that today. You know, we have equinoxes today in the spring and the fall that we pay attention to. So Enoch talks about that. He says, you know, there'll be 9 hours of day, 9 hours of night, you know, parts. And so in the 24-hour period, he's saying that, you know, half the day it'd be dark, half the day it'd be light. So he calls it that way. And so the portals is hard to understand because it is a different degree angle the sun or the moon sets every day. Now gates are the little small fractions between the portals. So if you got portals here that represent like a degree or two in the heavenlies, gates would be even smaller fractions in there. And so it gets very difficult to try to keep track of it. Unless you're a good mathematician, you plot it all out and draw it all out, then maybe you can figure out what's going on with the gates and portals. I've heard that there are people who have done that, plotted it all out and made a lot more sense. Apparently somebody did a video on it and plotted it all out, but I haven't looked for that video and haven't seen it, so I don't know. Maybe he was proven to be wrong and they just took it down, I don't know. But you got to understand, Enoch was seeing these things and talking about them and also being directed by an angel about them. And so Enoch is before Noah's flood. So this is back before people even understood science. And so the angels, the bad angels, were actually interfering with man on earth at that time, teaching them all kinds of things they're not supposed to know. And we read that in Enoch too. It says you taught when God judged those bad angels, he says you taught men knowledge they weren't ready for, and you should not have taught them that. Just like we talked, about the different bad angels that taught men how to make weapons of war, how to do smelting and making metals, and even one angel taught women how to abort their babies. So that was not, abortion is nothing new. It came from the pit of hell, from the bad angels that were here prior to Noah's flood. And so the angels had really messed with mankind, and God is very angry. But right now with Enoch, talking about the luminaries, he's got a good angel with him trying to explain things. I guess one thing I have trouble with is not understanding why they use terms like this, and the angel just didn't tell Enoch, hell, Enoch, the world turns and the sun's way up there and the moon's over here, but all the stuff you're looking at is just relative to your location on the earth. But the angel didn't do that. But there are interesting things he talks about, like the moon and the sun are the same size. But again, that is in reference to Enoch's position on the earth. And that's what causes eclipse to take place. When you got the sun and the moon exactly the same size, you get the eclipse, which are for signs and times and in the heavens. God wants to send a message out, just like we just had recently, with the eclipse going across the United States. So think about that, and people say, there is no God, whatever. So how did God created the sun and the moon that rises the same in the east and the west and the same portals, so no matter where the sun rises, the moon's going to rise in the same place. No matter where the sun sets, the sun's going to set in the same place. The portals are the same for the sun and the moon, even though the portals change every day. But that's because of the axis and rotation of the earth. But it's interesting to know, God, he could have created the moon going off in its own direction, a different direction. He could have created the moon to be way out of whack from the sun, but he didn't. He created it to set evenly with the sun. And now the moon has its own gates, I guess, and that's why you got the new moon, the full moon, quarter moons, and all that. But this was something totally new to the people on the earth at the time, what Enoch was talking about here. You may be thinking, oh, this is very elementary, my dear Watson, whatever. But this was new to the people on the earth. And they didn't understand yet about the earth rotating and the heavenlies rotating too. They did not understand that. And apparently God did not want them to know that yet. So they talk about the sun rising and the sun setting. We talk about that today, but we still know, how it happens. We still talk about the sun rise. We see that every day in the news. Sun sets every day in the news. But Enoch's day, that's all they knew. The sun rises and sun sets. So they talk about those things. So let's see, where was that? I gotta find my place again. I'll find it. Here we go. Verse 24. And on that day, the night amounts to 11 parts, and the day to 7 parts. All right, so there you go again. 11 plus 7 is 18. Again, it's basically talking about the parts of a day, or hours, 1.33 hours to a part, like I said. Verse 25, and the sun rises on that day from that second portal and sets in the west in the second portal, and returns to the east in the first portal for 1:30 mornings, and sets in the first portal in the west of heaven. Verse 26, and on that day the night becomes longer and amounts to the double of the day. All right, so in the wintertime, yeah, easily the night is twice as long as the day. And if you're, like I said, you're in Alaska, it's worse than that. So, and the night amounts to exactly 12 parts and the day to 6. Verse 27, the sun has therewith traversed the division of his orbit, and again returns on those divisions of his orbit, and enters that portal 30 mornings and sets in the west opposite. So again, it's saying that the sun traverses the division of his orbit. In other words, it goes around, because they're still thinking that the sun is the one that is moving, and they didn't realize it's the earth that moves. But so they still think the sun is rising and setting. Verse 28, and on that night has the night decreased in length by a 9th part, and the night has become 11 parts, and the day 7 parts. And the sun has returned, on verse 29, and entered into the second portal in the east. Again, like I said, by portals, it's the degrees off from the day before where the sun rises and sets. That's why a lot of these, astronomy creations that man makes all the time, like the Stonehenge and stuff like that, they try to measure these degrees of portals that the sun and the moon rise and set. They measure those things. Why is that important? Why was it important to man to know those things? Because that's how they understood the calendars. That's how they knew when it was planting time. That's how they knew when it was harvest time. So these kind of things are very important to mankind at that time. Today we don't think anything about it because we got calendars, we got clocks, we got all these kind of things. But for them, it was important that, planting season would be at this particular point. Harvest season would be at this particular point. And they figured those things out by monitoring and measuring the sunrise and sunset and moon rise and moon sets, and then putting up markers like a clock to mark when that is. So anybody can come along and say, okay, we're about ready to enter into planting season. We better get out and plow. And so, these calendars, you see the calendars all over South America too, by the South American Indians. They had their calendars too. Now, a lot of people try to make something out of those calendars like it's some big pagan ritual. No, mankind just wanted to know when the seasons are. It'd be kind of difficult if we turn around and said, well, just wait till the weather gets colder. Now, I'm sure they did do that too, but I'm sure there are certain plants and trees they watched all the time too. That when the leaves start turning or certain things happen to plants and trees, they go, now it must be this time. So before there was actually calendars like we have today, man thought it was a great accomplishment to kind of create their calendars in these portals when the sun rises and sets. And that's why you have these things. That's why every time there's some kind of new discovery made out there, ancient discovery made, they all say, well, it was probably a calendar they created. Well, it probably was, because it was important to have a calendar. So verse 29, and the sun has returned and entered into the second portal in the east and returns on his divisions for his orbit for 30 mornings, rising and setting. That would be 30 days. Verse 30, and on that day the night decreases in length, and night amounts to 10 parts, and the day 8. That's 18 again. And on that day the sun rises from that portal and sets in the west, and returns to the east, and rises in the third portal for 1 and 30 mornings. Now we have something a little bit different. So depending on what portal the sun is at, is going to be a point at which it will rise and set for 31 days instead of 30. But I guess it all depends on the angle, how it works. But if you ever notice our calendar, the Gregorian calendar today, we have certain months that have 30 days, certain months that have 31 days, and certain months that even have less than 30 days. All right. A lot of those were just by choice. Well, let's pick this, let's pick this. We got to add these extra days in there so we get the whole year in right. The 365-day year, so they add those. But if they would have went by Enoch here, and added the 31 days and the times that Enoch says to add 31 days, we could have a totally different calendar today. And it might change a lot in the growing systems and everything else. So even Enoch here says, there are some days that have 31 days. We have 31 days and several months during the year. So you see that here even in Enoch, that they talk about 31 mornings or 31 days. So, verse 32, and on that day the night decreases and amounts to 9 parts, and the day to 9 parts, and the night is equal to the day, and the year is exactly as it is days 364. So he's talking about the equinox again. That exactly the number of parts in the night equal the amount of parts in the day. That is known as the equinox. We know our equinox, there's one in the spring and there's one in the fall. So if you plotted these portals out in that kind of concept, you might even get a better idea how this is working. Verse 33, and the length of the day and of the night and the shortness of the day and the night arise. Through the course of the sun, these distinctions are made. They are separated. So verse 34, and it comes out, its course becomes daily longer and the course nightly shorter. Of course, we all know that. When you approach the summertime, you go beyond the equinox toward the summer portals, the days get longer, the nights get shorter. Verse 35, and this is the law and the course of the sun, and his return as often as he returns 60 times and rises, the great luminaries which is named the sun forever and ever. And that which thus rises is a great luminary, and is so named according to its appearance, according as the Lord commanded. Verse 37, as he rises, so he sets and decreases not, rests not, but runs day and night, and his light is 7-fold brighter than that of the moon. But as regards size, they are both equal. So here we go. He's telling us size-wise, from his perspective on earth, they're equal in size. But he says the sun is 7 times brighter than the moon. Of course, we know today that the moon reflects the sun's light. As far as Enoch was concerned, the sun is 7 times brighter than the moon. Some of us had a pretty bright moon, the place where he was at. The moon and its phases. Here we go in chapter 73, verse 1, page 156. And after this law, I saw another law dealing with a smaller luminary, which is named the moon. And her circumference is like the circumference of heaven, and her chariot in which she rides is driven by the wind. Let's talk about the chariots. He talks about this a lot. Enoch, it basically says chariots. He says something is pulling the sun and the moon in their orbits. Something's causing this orbit to take place. So he refers to it as the chariot. But God has set it in place, and he put angels in place over it, and the angels make sure that none of them break their course. Neither the sun nor the moon, that they keep their course for all eternity. Which is very interesting, because have you ever heard of people talk about the sun dying out and the sun going away? Ever heard those theories and all that? No, according to Enoch, it will never go away. It's set, its course is set, and for all eternity, it will keep its course. So that's an important thing to remember. So when you got these wackos out there, the doomsdayers, are saying that the sun's dying out and we're all going to die. Well, God says, no, the sun will never die. The sun will always be around. And so what about them dark spots? Well, we don't know anything about those dark spots. The dark spots could actually be even hotter than the non-dark areas. You don't know. And but Enoch, through God, promises the sun and moon will be here always. And it's kind of a mystery if you stop and think about it, what keeps this going? What about the gravitational pull of the earth on the moon? You would think it eventually sucked the moon into the earth and the moon would crash into the earth, but it doesn't. It maintains its orbit all the time. Why does it maintain its orbit? Because God has got control over it, and He's got angels making sure it doesn't deviate from its place and its orbits. It will always be there. How would you like that job as an angel? Your job is to make sure the moon never changes its orbit at any time. Yes, sir. For all eternity, that's your job. What a boring job that would be. But anyway, yeah. Round and around we go. But but that's a great promise. We can see this in this, that it's important to understand the sun and the moon will always be here. And it will not change. It's eternal. The sun and the moon are eternal. 73, verse 1, dealing with the moon, or we already talked about that. All right. And we talked about its circumference being like the sun. Verse 3, and her rising and setting changes every month, and her days are like the days of the sun. When her light is uniform, it amounts to a seventh part of the light of the sun. In other words, a full moon's light is like 1/7 of the light of the sun. I'm sure all of you have been outdoors in the woods, whatever, during the full moon. You can actually walk and see quite well on a full moon. The sun, the moon shining back, and you can. Verse 4, and thus she rises, and her first phase in the east comes forth on the 30th morning. So the moon rises in the east just like the sun does. The moon rises over there. It's really amazing when you ask people, where does the sun or the moon rise and where does it set? Most people couldn't tell you that. They'll tell you the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Ask them where the moon rises and sets. What's that? Yeah, sometimes you can see it. Even during the day you can see it. But ask them where the moon rises and sets. And a lot of people go, I don't know. Everybody knows about the sun, but they don't know about the moon. Verse 4, and thus she rises, and her first phase in east comes forth on the 30th morning. And on that day she becomes visible, and constitutes for you the first phase of the moon on the 30th day together with the sun in the portal where the sun rises. All right, so basically telling you that, the different phases of the moon go through all of its phases in 30 days. Is that correct? It is correct. We go from new moon to full moon and back again to new moon. That's 30 days. So it is absolutely accurate. And verse 5, and 1/2 of her goes forth by a seventh part, and her whole circumference is empty, without light. So that's when you don't see the moon, with the exception of the 1/7 part of it and the 14th part of her light. Talk about a new moon. Verse 6, and when she receives 1/7 part of the half of her light amounts to 1/7 part and 1/2 thereof. Verse 7, and she sets with the sun. When the sun rises, the moon rises with him. I find it interesting that Enoch calls the moon with the female pronouns and the sun with male pronouns. I thought that was kind of interesting. And the moon sets with the sun and is invisible that night with the 14 parts and half of one of them. 8, and she rises on that day with exactly a seventh part, and comes forth and recedes from the rising of the sun, and in her remaining days she becomes bright in the remaining 13 parts. 74, verse 1, page 158. And I saw another course, a law for her, and how according to that law she performs her monthly revolution. And all these Uriel, the holy angel who is the leader of them, all showed to me and their positions, and I wrote down their positions as he showed them to me. I wrote down their months as they were, and the appearance of their light, till after the days were accomplished. After 15 days were accomplished. 3. In the single seventh part, she accomplishes all her light in the east, and in the single seventh part accomplishes all her darkness in the west. And in the certain months she alters her settings, and in certain months she pursues her own particular course. Now, I don't know what he means by that, the moon pursuing its own particular course. I think that means when it disappears, they don't know what it's doing. You know, we know that when the moon finally sets, you don't see it for a while until it rises up for a new moon again. So Enoch thinks that she's pursuing her own particular course. That's when the moon goes on vacation and just does what it wants to do, I guess, what he's referring to. Verse 5, in the 2 months the moon sets with the sun in those 2 middle portals, the third and the fourth. Verse 6, she goes forth for 7 days and turns about and returns again through the portal where the sun rises and accomplishes all her light. And she recedes from the sun, and in the 8 days enters the 6th portal for which the sun goes forth. Verse 7, and when the sun goes forth from the 4th portal, she goes forth again in 7 days until she goes forth from the 5th and turns back again in 7 days into the 4th portal and accomplishes all her light. And she recedes and enters into the 1st portal in 8 days. Verse 8, and she returns again in 7 days unto the 4th portal from which the sun goes forth. Thus I saw in their position how the moons rose and the sun set in those days. 10. And if 5 years are added together, the sun has an overplus of 30 days, and all the days accrued to it for one of those 5 years, and when they are full, amounts to 364 days. That begs the question. So Enoch says there's 364 days in a year. Why is it we got 365 today? Think about that for a moment. Enoch, several times here we refer to a year being 364 days. What happened between Enoch and today? Well, Joshua added a day to fight, but that's not the main reason. What major event on the earth caused between Enoch and today? Noah's flood. So the balance of the earth changed with Noah's flood. And then the continents separated during that time. So something in the earth's rotation speed slowed down, because you got to remember, when all the continents were one landmass, I guess the earth spun a little bit faster. But when the continents spread out around the world, it looks like it slowed down totally for a whole year, one day. So that's a good thing to ponder over. 364 days to 365 days. How did that happen? It almost has to be Noah's flood that made the difference. Because remember, Noah's flood, there was one great continent, and then all the continents split apart, as it would say in the Bible, and the earth was divided in those days. And so we split off into different continents, which began to form all the great mountains and everything else. All the continents run into one another during Noah's flood. But God didn't have to worry about great loss of life, because there was only 8 people alive in a boat during that whole period of time. So he split the continents. And that's also why you find seashells on the highest mountains on earth, because they all rose up out of the ocean floor because of the splitting of the continents, shells running into one another and rising up great mountains. The earth didn't used to have mountains like that. Oh, they would have had smaller hills they called mountains, but nothing like we call mountains today. That all occurred after Noah's flood. Okay, so now we get even more confusing here. Verse 13, in 3 years there are 1,092 days, and in 5 years 1,820 days, so that in 8 years there are 2,912 days. Verse 14, for the moon alone the days amount to 3 years and 1,062 days, and in 5 years she falls 50 days behind, to the sum of 1,770. There is to be added 1,062 days. 15, and in 5 years there are 1,770 days, so that the moon, the day in 7 years amount to 2,832 days. Have fun with those numbers. 16, for in 8 years she falls behind to the amount of 80 days. So all the days she falls behind in 8 years are 80. Verse 17, and the year is accurately completed in conformity with the world stations and stations of the sun, which rise from the portals to which the sun rises and sets 30 days. Chapter 75, verse 1. And the leaders of the heads of the thousands who are placed over the whole creation, over all the stars, have also to do with 4 intercalary days. The word intercalary, that means days added to make up for lost time or odd numbers. Like our leap year would be intercalary day that was added, our leap day. And like in February 29th would be added. That would be known as an intercalary. So it's like you get the word calendar concept in that word. So they add extra days to make the calendar come out right. So even Enoch is saying that you had to have these also. Being inseparable from their office according to the reckoning of the year, and these render services on the 4 days which are not reckoned in the reckoning of the year, and on them to men go wrong therein, for those luminaries truly render service on the world stations, one in the first portal, one in the third portal of heaven, and one in the fourth portal, and one in the sixth portal, and the exactness of the year is accomplished through its separate. All right, so what he's saying to men, when they didn't account for what they call the intercalary times they needed to add, they did wrong. So continue on that last verse. It's accomplished through the separate 364 stations. For the signs and times, verse 3, and the years and the days of the angel Uriel showed me, whom the Lord of glory has set forever over all the luminaries of heaven, in the heaven and in the world, that they should rule on the face of heaven and be seen on the earth, and be leaders for the day and the night. For example, the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the ministering creatures which make the revolution, and all the chariots of heaven. In like manner 12 doors Uriel showed me, opening in the circumference of the sun's chariot in heaven, through which the rays of the sun break forth, and from them is warmth diffused over the earth. And when they are opened at their appointed seasons, verse 5, and for the winds and the spirit of the dew, for when they are opened, standing open in heavens at the end of the earth, and out of which goes forth the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the works of heaven, and the east and the west. So if you completely understood everything I just read, you can explain it to me later. So a lot of this is a lot of mystery, but I think I find it fascinating that Enoch is seeing these things and writing these things down. Nobody knew these things before. Verse 7, there are many windows open to the left and right of them, and one window at its appointed season produces warmth according to those doors from which the stars come forth according as he has commanded them, wherein they said according to their number. When it says the stars coming forth, he's talking about angels here. And I saw the chariots in heaven running in the world above those portals in which revolve the stars that never set. And one is larger than all the rest, and is that makes its course through the entire world. So those stars are angels, and they control all of this. God's got angels that control the sun. They got angels that control the stars. They got angels that control the moon. These are assignments of all these angels. So he has got creatures that he appointed and made sure this is your job, you do this. And they do it. And that's why it will be all for all eternity. Okay, page 163, 76, verse 1. At the ends of the earth I saw 12 portals open to all the quarters of heaven, from which the winds go forth and blow over the earth. 3 of them are open on the face that is the east of the heavens, and 3 in the west, and 3 on the right, the south of the heavens, and 3 on the left, the north. And the 3 first are those of the east, and 3 are of the north, and 3 are those on the left, the south, and 3 of the west. Through 4 of these comes the winds of blessing and prosperity. I find this interesting that there are winds of blessing and prosperity. Like, what's that? Yeah, we want more of those kind of winds, right? And from those 8 come hurtful winds. Very interesting. So you have 4 winds that are blessing and prosperity, and 8 winds that are hurtful. And when they are sent, they bring destruction on all the earth, and on the water upon it, and all who dwell therein, on everything on which is in the water and on the land. So it made me wonder about hurricanes and tornadoes and all those. Those are hurtful winds. So Enoch saw the portals in which these different winds come from. What would be a blessing wind? A breeze. A cool breeze, yeah, a cool breeze in the summertime. That could be a wind of blessing. You know, wind is one of my least favorite weather patterns. But it's necessary. I understand that it's necessary. Because the seeds and the pollen need to be blown around and distributed properly to keep the plants growing. That God is, not the ones that we plant, but the ones that God has planted, to keep them blooming around the world. The what? Oh yeah, controlling the insects? Yeah. So there are beneficial winds and there are hurtful winds. We all pretty know what a hurtful wind is. All right, verse 5. And the first wind from those portals, called the east wind, comes forth through the first portal, which is in the east, declining toward the south, and it comes forth desolation, drought, heat, and destruction. I find it interesting that when the judgment of God comes down upon the earth, it's always coming from the east. I also find it interesting that China's nuclear weapons and their missiles are called the east wind. Yeah, so I thought, well, okay, the destruction from the east. So, but God's judgment, anytime you read in the Bible about God's judgment coming, it always says from the east. Verse 6. And through the second portal in the middle comes what is fitting, and from it there comes rain, fruitfulness, and prosperity, and dew. And through the third portal, which lies toward the north, comes cold and drought. So a wind of blessing might be also that it brings in rain, that it blows in the right direction off the ocean or whatever and brings in rain clouds and rain so that everybody gets blessed by it. Because we need rain, we need water.
Sorry, where are you?
Verse 7, 164. And after these come forth the south winds through 3 portals. Through the first portal of them inclining to the east comes forth a hot wind. Wow. That's not a blessing. Hot wind. You ever heard of the Santa Ana winds? They're winds that come from the east. A lot of people don't realize this, but in California, when they have all those fires and brush fires and forest fires in California, they'll say because of the Santa Ana winds. Those are winds that come from the east that came across the Mojave Desert, and they're hot winds, and they fan the flames of the fires. And so those Santa Ana winds, it just kind of fits real well what Enoch is talking about here. And those are definitely winds of cursing, when they come from out of the desert like that, and they're hot, and they're blowing hot. So imagine anywhere where there's hot winds on the earth, and even in Israel, you know, particularly in Israel, a southern wind would probably be the worst they would get, because that comes right off of the Arabian desert or the Sahara desert if it's from the west. So, but I know that here in America, California gets hammered badly by an eastern wind called the Santa Ana winds. Verse 8, and through the middle portal next to it there come forth fragrant smells, dew and rain and prosperity and health. So the good winds bring pleasant things like this. Verse 9, and through the third portal line to the west there comes forth dew and rain, locusts and desolation. So another portal of wind here, I guess, coming from that particular portal, it brings locusts also. Of course, you know, we don't know how the land was arranged during the time of Enoch. So coming in that portal line to the west is not a good thing. Verse 10, and after these north winds, and from the seventh portal in the east come dew, rain, locusts, and desolations. 11, and from the middle portal comes in a direct direction health and rain, dew, and prosperity. And through the third portal in the west comes cloud, hoarfrost, snow, and rain, dew, and locusts. So here you're talking about frost, snow, rain, and locusts coming from a western wind. Verse 12, and after these four are the west winds, through which the first portal adjoining the north comes forth dew and hoarfrost, and colds, and snow, and frost. And from the middle portal comes forth dew and rain, and prosperity and blessing. And through the last portal which adjoins the south comes forth drought and desolation, and burning and destruction. And the 12 portals of the 4 quarters of heaven are therewith completed, and all their laws, all their plagues, and all their benefactions have I shown to thee, my son Methuselah. You got to remember that Enoch is teaching his son these things that he learned, Methuselah. And Methuselah was Enoch's son, and Methuselah lived a long time. And he probably wrote a lot of this down. All right, 77 verse 1 on page 165. And the first quarter is called the east because it is the first. The second the south because the Most High will descend there. Yea, there in quite a special sense will he who is blessed forever descend. The Most High. All right, we're going to talk about that one a little bit more. Let me find my notes here on that. About the south. Did you guys know that the Lord's coming from the south? He'll come to Jerusalem from the east, but he actually comes initially from the south. Yeah. Yay for the south. Yeah. I'm going to read some scriptures about that here in a moment, as soon as I can find them. Yes, it is. All right. Here we go. Okay. The scripture says God comes from Teman. Teman, T-E-M-A-N. Teman is a Hebrew word for south. So God comes from the south. I'll give you the scriptures. Habakkuk 3:3, Obadiah 9, Amos 1:12. And you'll need to know Ezekiel 25 verse 13 and Isaiah 63 verse 1. So I'll go through those again. Habakkuk 3:3, Obadiah 9, Amos 1 verse 12, Ezekiel 25 verse 13, Isaiah 63 verse 1. Do I need to repeat those again? Everybody got them? Isaiah 63 verse 1. So not only does it say God will come from Teman, which means south, it also says he comes from Bozrah. Bozrah is another city close to Teman, and it's in the land of Edom. Both of these are towns in the land of Edom. God will come there first, not Jerusalem. He will eventually head for Jerusalem, but he will come here first. And it's the Son that comes. It also tells us that when he comes to Bozrah, his garments will be dyed red in blood. Now why does he go to Teman and Bozrah? So Enoch's right. This is what is said here, that he will come. He that is blessed forever will descend here. Why does he go to Teman and Bozrah in these areas that we read in the scriptures? It's because there's something big going on there at this time. It's really close to where Babylon is. Will be the new Babylon being built right now along the Red Sea. Also, when you read in Isaiah 34, the land of Edom will become as burning pitch. All this land will be destroyed, and that's where Teman and Bozrah is also, in Isaiah 34. It very well could be the palace of the beast of Revelation in that area. When the Lord comes down, he's going to destroy it first. When the nations gather against the Messiah, when they see the sign of the Son of Man, they're going to fill up that whole Arrowhead Valley from the Red Sea all the way up probably toward Galilee with millions of men when they attempt to fight the Lamb of God, because they know he's going to be eventually going to Jerusalem. But when they start filling that whole Arrowhead Valley, they call it, with millions of people, that may actually be where the palace of the beast will be, down in the south area there. And the Lord's going to come there first, and he's going to destroy all those armies and nations, and probably Teman and Bozrah, everything else that's in Edom. Why does God completely wipe out the land of Edom? You have to think about that. What particular hatred does he have for the land of Edom, that he has to make it burning pitch where nothing can live there, completely destroyed? That's why I always kind of laugh sometimes when I'm looking at different translations of different Bibles. It says, nothing lives there. One version says, but the pelican. Bad translation. But that word is also translated as satyr, which is demonic, demon. That would have been a better way for any Bible translators to describe what lives in that land of burning pitch. Certainly nothing in the flesh can live in a land of burning pitch. So demonic activity would be a better way if they would have described it as such. And there are a couple of Bible translations that have that right. But I've seen anywhere from pelicans and cormorants to, birds. And why would birds be living there? Particularly a pelican, which is a water bird, How do they eat? What are they doing? So you think the translators would have figured that out, that something's not right here saying pelican, but they never did. So the land of Edom will be a horrible place to be. God's judgment will hit that land, and it will become a land of burning pitch where nothing but demons can live in, is what it's saying. So God will come to the south first, Teman and Bozrah, whose garments are dipped in blood. Why is his garments in Isaiah 63:1? Why is his garments dipped in blood? He just destroyed millions of people who came to fight him. The beast gathered all the nations together to fight the Lamb of God, and he will destroy them all, because they all worship the beast. They all think that the beast is God. And if the beast says, fight that one that Christians call the Lamb of God, you got to destroy him. I am God. I'm ordering you to go fight him. And that's what's going to happen. They go, yes, sir, we'll right away, sir, we'll go. And so millions of deceived people, this way in the religion of Islam, they actually teach that. They say that the one the Christians call the Messiah is really the Antichrist. So they're set up for when the sign of the Son of Man appears, which is just prior to the second coming itself. The Muslims already believe that that's going to happen, but he's the bad guy. And the beast will convince the world that he's the bad guy. And they will all come to fight the Lamb of God, beginning in the south, in the land of Teman and Bozrah, where the land of Edom becomes burning pitch. Wow. So it's interesting that Enoch talks about this stuff. Enoch talks about, where the Lord will descend in the south. Who would have ever figured that out, right? Well, read that one again. Because verse 1, because the Most High will descend there in the south. Yea, there is quite a special sense will he who is blessed forever descend. So he's talking about the south. This is talking about Teman and Bozrah is what he's talking about here. Then after the Lord destroys those nations that come against him in the south there, then he will head for Jerusalem and come into Jerusalem through the east at that point. So the south area, which is the land of Edom too. The south part of Israel is Edom. So, verse 2. And the west quarter is named diminished, because there all the luminaries of the heaven wane and go down. In this particular case, it's talking about the sun and the moon setting in the west. And the fourth quarter, named in the north, is divided into three parts. The first of them is for the dwelling of men, and the second contains seas of water and abysses, and forests and rivers and darkness and clouds. And the third part contains a garden of righteousness. Wow. Okay. So we're looking at different portals and different directions on the compass, and it's telling us that particularly the verse 3, and the fourth quarter, named the north, is divided into three parts. The first of them is for the dwelling of men in the north. So, is that talking about the land of Israel? I don't know what the continent looked like prior to the flood, but in the north, that's where the dwelling of men is predominant in the north. Then, of course, you have the sea, the water, the abysses, the forests, and the rivers, and darkness, and clouds. And the third part contained the garden of righteousness. So, I tell you what, I wish I could have seen what the earth looked like prior to Noah's flood. But it's telling us right here that in certain directions on that one massive landmass before Noah's flood, there was one part of that landmass where men dwelled, because the weather was good, probably, not so severe that it would be so difficult on them, where there be forests and waters and trees and all these kind of things. And then you have another part that is the sea itself and the abysses. The abyss is just talking about the very deep oceans and stuff like that. So, and then the third part contained the garden of righteousness. That would be the Garden of Eden. Verse 4, and I saw 7 high mountains higher than all the mountains which are on the earth, and hence comes forth hoarfrost. Days, season, and years pass away. Verse 5, and I saw 7 rivers on the earth, larger than all the rivers, and one of them coming from the west pours its water into the great sea. So, these rivers are difficult to figure out, because the continents all switched around. They're not even the same rivers anymore since Noah's flood. But one of them dumps into the great sea. 6, and these 2 come from the north to the sea and pour the waters into the Euphrates Sea in the east. So there's a lot of great rivers in the earth. Which ones are we talking about? Are we talking about the Nile? Are we talking about the Tigris, Euphrates? We talk about the Indus, the Ganges, the Oxus, the Arctic. There's great rivers that are in Middle Asia. Great rivers that flow out of all those mountains, the Himalayas and all that. There's some great rivers there too. So we don't know what rivers. When the land completely readjusted itself after Noah's flood, we do not know the answers to any of these. In verse 7, and the remaining 4 come forth on the side of the north to their own sea. 2 of them to the Euphrates Sea, and 2 into the great sea, and discharge themselves there, and some say into the desert. 8, 7 great islands I saw in the sea, and in the mainland, 2 in the mainland, and 5 in the great sea. So what great islands were they talking about? What is the great sea versus the Euphrates Sea? Don't know. Some people seem to think that the Euphrates Sea would have been down there like the Indian Ocean or something like that, and the great sea would have been everything else. But we don't know again. We just don't know. It all changed after Noah's flood. 78, verse 1, page 166. And the names of the sun are the following. The first is Orjaris, and the second Thomas. And the moon has 4 names. The first name is Asonja, the second name is Ebla, the third name is Benassi, and the fourth Ire. These are the 2 great luminaries, and their circumferences is like the circumference of heaven, and the size of the circumference of both is alike. Verse 4, in the circumference of the sun there are 7 portions of light, which are added to it more than to the moon. In a definite measure it is transferred until the 7th portion of the sun is exhausted. And they set and entered the portals of the west, and make the revolution by the north, and come forth through the eastern portals on the face of heaven. When the moon rises, 1/14th part appears in the heaven, and light becomes full in her. And on the 14th day she accomplishes her light. Which is true. The full moon occurs mid-month. So when you're talking about 30 days in a month, 14 days in is pretty much mid-month. We just had Passover. Passover has full moons. It will always have a full moon if the calendars are set right. Tabernacles will always have a full moon. That's 2 moedims that will occur on full moons. There's 1 moedim that will occur on a new moon, and that's Yom Teruah. That is a day of shouting, day of blowing in the fall. That one always occurs on a new moon. The Passover and Tabernacles will always occur on a full moon. And if you noticed yesterday after our Passover Seder, if you went outside, it was a full moon. Very pretty, full moon. So stop and think about it for a moment. Israel had its Passover where it was at. It was a full moon there too. And we had a full moon here. The whole world, it would have been a full moon. Think about that. How God set that up. When it's time for a full moon, the whole world will see the full moon. when it's a new moon, the whole world will notice a new moon. Amazing how God set this up. It's amazing how he did these things. So when they turn around and said, claim, Easter, we're going to make it as the closest Sunday to the equinox, that is totally out of line what the Bible says. Totally out of line. It's supposed to be on the 14th in the sun. The sun being the Hebrew month. You got 30 days for the moon to go from new moon to full moon. And the full moon will always be in the middle of the month, then wane and go away by the end of the month. So Passover will be in the middle of that month, the 14th, at a full moon. So when you say Easter, we're going to pick Easter being the closest Sunday to the equinox, has nothing to do with the alignment of the luminaries that God set forth. So when people say, oh, we celebrate Easter, but, I guess you could look at it like this. I guess it really doesn't matter, because Yeshua, they're just celebrating Yeshua and his death and resurrection on Easter. But I like the idea that we do it when God said to do it. That makes a lot more sense to me and much more understanding of God's plan and how he set forth his plan. Some people say, well, the word Easter, that comes from Ishtar, Babylonian. Not really. I don't believe so. There's another word that is in Latin that sounds like Easter, but it means the rising of the sun. And so we think that's where they actually got the term Easter. But it's not the 14th in the sun, the Hebrew month. We do know that, in the 2nd century, the church wanted to eliminate everything Hebraic. They wanted nothing Hebraic, to celebrate nothing Hebraic. So they eliminated the concept of Passover too. And decided, well, we need to celebrate Passover because that's when the Lord died and rose again. So we'll just call it Easter, and we'll celebrate it on the closest Sunday to the equinox, where God says, on the 14th in the sun, you celebrate Passover. So I think it's more important that we celebrate as God said and not as man said. So, and I'll tell you what, it's not easy. I mean, we all got family, we all got acquaintances and everything else going. Matter of fact, I was just talking to Allan earlier. She says, you cannot believe my friends that go to a certain church here in town. I says, Easter's already over with. Why are you celebrating Passover? And Allan asked me, what do I tell them, Rabbi? So I explained to her, you tell them this. What's that? I said, and they eat a good ham. Yeah, and they eat, oh yeah, they got that kosher ham. Yeah, and stop thinking about that too. How did ham become the food for Easter? Where did that come from? That came from the Catholic Church too. When they were trying to destroy everything Hebraic, and all of a sudden pork became the food for Easter. Celebrating the day of the crucifixion and resurrection of our Lord, and they're eating pork. What an insult. I don't care if you want to be kosher or not, but to do that in the celebration of our risen Lord, to me, is a slap in the face. And and I have family members, when they invite me, it's like, oh, come on over for Easter lunch, whatever. I go, oh gosh, what are you serving? Oh, we got a nice ham. You got anything else? Well, I guess we could fix something else for you. So I go over there, and me and Nita go over there. We have our, quote, special food they made for us, so we don't have to eat their ham for Easter. And then then the 101 questions. Why won't you eat ham? So we start talking about that. So, but this is what the corrupted church did starting around the 2nd century A.D. to eliminate everything Hebraic. Why do you think they serve ham now? They're getting rid of everything that was Hebraic and concepts and they want to change everything. Change the times and seasons and laws is what they did. Well, that's exactly what the Antichrist does. You see in Daniel. Change the time, season, and laws. So, wow. That's why a lot of people quite often call the Pope the Antichrist. But I don't think he's the Antichrist because he obviously hasn't done anything to be the Antichrist yet. But he's being led by Satan to do those kind of things. And so, yeah. Speaking of that, I was reading in the news today that our illustrious president is on a pro-abortion tour, and he's speaking about abortions everywhere, and he's particularly in Florida right now, trying to convince everybody to liberalize their laws, to make abortion available at any time for anybody at anywhere. And so while he was speaking, he did the signs of the cross like Catholics do. While he's speaking about abortion, he did his thing, you know. And Joe Biden. Talk about a hypocrite. His what? Yeah. Yeah, the Pope is not good about this. Yeah. So, we see the enemy of our soul hard at work doing stuff like this. And what can we do? Tell the truth where we can. Be not afraid to tell the truth. Be not afraid to stand up and speak the truth, even in the midst of persecution. And folks, it's increasing. The persecution is increasing. Even here in this country, the persecution is increasing many times. Remember what I talked here a few weeks ago about the beginning of the slaughters of the martyrs? We talked about that in Enoch. There will be begin a slaughter of martyrs. And we're beginning to see how that's being arranged. Even here in the United States, there's one particular political party that absolutely hates believers. And they're in control of a lot of things, and they will eventually join in with the slaughter of the martyrs if we don't change it. We've got to change it. So, I don't know what else I could say about that. So anyway, you know, people say, well, I don't get involved in politics. And I tell them, you know, you live in a free country. You have the ability to talk about politics, and you have the ability to vote and make changes. You think God is going to just turn a blind eye that you don't vote for righteousness, that you don't vote for what is right? No, he won't turn a blind eye. He'll consider that a sin because you had a chance to make a change and you didn't take it. Why didn't you take it? Because you really supported the sin. What's that? Oh yeah, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, right? Yeah. You know, if we lived in a dictator country where our very life was at danger at any moment, that could be an excuse why you keep quiet, like in Nazi Germany and stuff like that. You may want to keep quiet. But here right now, when you still have the ability to make a change in this country and you don't take it, God is going to hold you responsible for that. Doesn't mean you got to go out on a street corner somewhere and get yourself beat up or shot, but it does mean that you got to talk. You got to talk to your families. You got to talk to your friends. It does mean you got to vote the Bible, vote in righteousness. You have to do those things. Otherwise, our children will not live in a free country. It's being taken away from us fast. This is why the founding fathers say, you know, vote God. They tell you to vote God. Vote for only people who are God-fearing people. The founding fathers all said that. And yet things are being twisted and turned. Oh, the Constitution is evil. You know, the Bill of Rights is evil. It's racist. Blah, 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 blah. Of course, the left always likes to badmouth everything that's right. And they will destroy everything that is right. So we got to stand up to them. That means we don't sin in the process. We don't go out and start committing murder. We're not transgenders that go out there to start shooting everybody because they don't agree with being transgender. So we don't commit murder. We don't do the things against God. But you got to stand for righteousness, and you got to let your voice be heard. It's important, or this country's lost. We have a narrow window this election season to maybe save it. But if we don't save it then, I think we're done as a nation. So anyway, all right, off my soapbox. Okay. Hi. I gotta remember where I was at now. 168, which verse? Starting with verse 9? I think it's verse 9. And in certain months, the month has 29 days, and once 28 days. So here you see a month for 29 days and 28 days. So when we look at our calendar today and we see these months have got 30, these months have got 31, these months got 28 or 29, do they match with the months that Enoch says they should be? Probably don't. If we had a calendar that matched exactly what Enoch said on these, how long these months are supposed to be on these certain portals, we may find things fit much better in the growing season and all that. But, it doesn't take a rocket science for the farmers to figure out when they need to plant and when they need to harvest. But it would probably be a lot better for us if we knew the months that have the longer days and the months that have the shorter days, and our calendars show that. Would probably be much better. Verse 10, and Ariel showed me another law, when light is transferred to the moon, and on which side it is transferred to her by the sun. During all the period during which the moon is growing in her light, she is transferring it to herself, when opposite the sun during the 14 days her light is accomplished in the heaven. So here we actually see he is talking about the moon getting the light from the sun. So he apparently knew that the moon was getting the light from the sun. When she is illumined throughout, her light is accomplished in heaven, verse 12. And on the first day she is called the new moon, for on that day the light is risen upon her. And she becomes a full moon exactly on the day when the sun sets in the west. You ever notice that when you see a full moon? It's right after the sun sets in the west. What's that? You ever notice when there's a full moon, particularly a harvest moon, how bright it is you see rise in the east, seems to fill the sky? It's always right after the sun sets in the west. That's what I just said. So when the sun sets in the west, the moon rises over here as a full moon, because the moon is catching the direct rays of the sun. And it really looks bigger because of the atmosphere it has to cross, magnifies the light. And so you have what they call, the harvest moon, or the bright, big, full moon. Anybody know what a blue moon is? You ever heard that phrase, once in a blue moon? What is a blue moon? Is it the moon when it's crying? I don't know where they get the term blue moon, but what it is because certain times a year, like twice in a year, because of the shorter months, there's going to be 1 month where there's going to be 2 full moons. And when you get 2 full moons, the second one is known as the blue moon. So when they say once in a blue moon, that makes it once or twice a year is what they're saying. When you tell somebody, yeah, once in a blue moon I'll get around to doing that, You're saying once or twice a year I will do that, is what you're saying. So that's the blue moon, the concept of the blue moon. When there's 2 full moons in a month, the second one is known as the blue moon. Verse 11. During all the period during which the moon is growing in her light, she is transferring itself when opposite to the sun. During 14 days, her light is accomplished in heaven. When she is illumined throughout, her light is accomplished in the heaven. Verse 12. On the first day she is called the new moon, and on that day the light rises on her. She becomes a full moon exactly on the day when the sun sets in the west. I just talked about that. And from the east she rises at night, and the moon shines the whole night through till the sun rises over against her, and the moon is seen over against the sun. So in other words, that full moon will last all night, even to the point when the sun rises back up in the east. It will last all night. You know, I like to hunt, and there's a thing called a farmer's almanac. You ever heard of that, farmer's almanac? They understand the cycles of the moon too. And by the cycles of the moon, they know the right time to plant, they know the right time to fish, they know the right time to hunt. It all has to do with the moon. Because I like to hunt elk, and quite often I go out there and hunt elk. And when I see the Fish and Game Department has set the beginning week of hunting on the full moon, I hate that. Because what happens is the moon's up all night long, the elk are running around and whistling and playing and having all kinds of fun in the moonlight. So by the time the sun comes up where I can see where I'm going, they're tired and they're already bedded down. So I don't like it when the Fish and Game schedules the beginning of the hunt on the full moon. So it does make a difference, even with the animals. They like roaming around in the dark when they can see with the full moon. They're running all over the place. And makes it much more difficult for the hunters to accomplish a goal when that occurs. Now you're trying to tromp through the woods and scare them out of their beds. And that's never very good, because they're going to hear you a long time before you get there. Not easy to do. So, anyway. Verse 14. And on the side whence the light of the moon comes forth, there again she wanes till all the light vanishes, and all the days of the month are at an end. Her circumference is empty, void of light. So as you get the end of this lunar calendar they're talking about, the moon loses its light. Doesn't have any light anymore. Then a few days later, suddenly gets its first crescent, and that's the new moon. And you start all over again. Verse 50, what's that? Is there a certain month that this will happen? Fall? It happens every month. It happens every month, right. Verse 15. And 3 months she makes of 30 days, and at the time she makes 3 months of 29 days each, in which she accomplishes her waning in the first period of time, in the first portal for 177 days. And in the time of her going out she appears for 3 months of 30 days each, and for 3 months she appears of 29 each. At night she appears like a man. Wow. The moon appears like a man. Means that its shape and form is the man in the moon. You ever looked up there and see the face is shaped like a man? So here Enoch tells you he appears like a man in the full moon. It looks like a face on the moon. You know, you never see the backside of the moon. That moon stays with the earth facing one way all the time. It sets in the west and rises up east. That same face is there all the time. It doesn't change. It doesn't rotate. It follows the contour of the earth and rises up the same face of a man facing the earth all the time. So that's all God's doing. Well, we know now because of the satellites and all that kind of stuff. But until we launched telescopes and satellites, everything else in the earth, we had no idea what the backside of the moon looked like.
Heavily cratered, very heavily.
Heavily cratered, it is. Very heavily cratered by debris in space, comets and meteors and stuff like that. Unless you belong to a particular religion, and if you belong to a particular religion, you believe there are Quaker-like people that live on the moon. And you can't see them because they're on the backside of the moon. How convenient is that? What's that?
So I imagine, so we don't see the backside of the moon, glowing rocks and stuff. Is it possible, in my imagination now, is it possible it's just the earth from all those things that came through?
Say that again, Ruthie, about...
I was thinking in my head, the moon is like a guardian of all the comets or rocks that will hit the earth. So it's keeping it from coming through.
I don't know. I don't know if the moon is acting as a protectorate or not. I don't know if it's drawing all those meteors and small asteroids into itself to protect the earth. I don't know.
That's why I'm talking about it's heavily cratered.
Right. Well, it is heavy cratered, so it obviously it's taken the beating from some of them, and how the moon would force those to go a different direction and hit the earth, that I'm not sure. Yeah. We'll have to ask God about that. What's that? John Glenn might know, right?
He never made it.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing thing what God has done up there, and all the, people don't have any idea about the incredibleness that God has created. He put all these angels up there to make sure everything just stays perfect. It doesn't change for all eternity. That's why you can always count on the sun rising. But, and all these buts are always interesting to hear about, but there are some scriptures that talk about the sun being 7 times brighter and the sun going down midday and stuff like that. I'm not sure how to interpret all that, but it happens during the tribulation period that all these things happen. So are those symbolic type of prophecies that are in the Bible, or do the heavens really start changing their courses in the last days before God puts it back to normal? That it just signs and times to let you know God controls it all. If he doesn't want the sun to go down, he won't let the sun go down. He controls it all. But there is a scripture that says the sun will go down midday and it will get 7 times brighter on the earth. Well, nobody can survive that. When does that happen? Of course, when it talks about the sun and the earth, you have to remember too, quite often the earth in Hebrew is Eretz. And Eretz could also mean the land of Israel. So is it 7 times brighter in the land of Israel? Is that because the New Jerusalem is hovering above the old Jerusalem and you bring all this new light into play there? That would tell you that everybody that's in that land has to have a resurrected body, because neither beast nor man can handle the sun being 7 times brighter. So there will be some cosmos changes where God is definitely going to show everybody he's in charge. And he will set the cosmos how he wants to set it for his glory. And so, even though it's set now, and it says forever, but it doesn't mean that God can't play with it. Just to show that he's God. He is God. When the sun goes down the noonday, what does that mean? When the sun goes down on the noonday? I don't know what that means. You know, some people have speculated that we will have a pole shift on the earth. That the earth is like this and goes like this. So the sun starts setting at a different time and place than it was before the pole shift. That's just one speculation from people that kind of know a little bit more about it than I do, that are more like scientist type people, that says, well, that could be accomplished with a pole shift. So maybe God in the middle of the tribulation will take the world and rotate 90 degrees. Yeah. That would be crazy for the world to do that. That would certainly change everything in a big time. But that's a possibility. Yeah, we'll have to see how God's going to do all this. Yeah, it's pretty nuts. All right, so at verse 17, at night she appears like a man. Who would ever thought that Enoch told you that the man in the moon is in his book? You know? You have to tell people that, yeah, we're reading Enoch. He told us about the man in the moon. For 20 days each time, and by the day she appears like to heaven, there is nothing else save her light. Wow. Okay, we'll stop right there on page 169. We'll pick it up there next week. Do you have any questions? We've been taking questions all along. Go ahead, Jim.
You know how a lot of times we pray about the four winds. Does that have anything to do with this? You know, the positive parts of the four winds. We asked for the four winds because I thought they were spirits. You know, all
It could.
And what's the name of that black cube in? What's the name of that place? A big city that's supposed to be like.
Mecca.
Mecca. That's where the big cube is, right?
Yeah, that's
So
that big Kapa'ah.
So that's why he's probably going to come down there in that area and destroy that first.
Well, surely that Mecca's in the south too.
Yeah.
Yeah, Medina and Mecca and Teman and Bozrah. Teman and Bozrah are more up there toward Israel, but Mecca and Medina are a little bit further south. Yeah.
Okay. Is it to come from the south from where we're at, or will you look at the east?
I think the reference point here is always Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Jerusalem didn't exist back during the time of Enoch, but it's called the center of the earth.
Right.
So I believe it's called the center of the earth because if you push all the continents back into one landmass, in the middle of that would be Jerusalem.
Okay.
So I think it did not lose that connotation. For reference points, I think it's still Jerusalem. It just at the time of Enoch, there was no Jerusalem and nobody living there. But for a geographical location, I think it's still Jerusalem. Uh-huh.
Do we know when this was written?
The book of Enoch? Just before Noah's flood.
Okay. And it's the oldest book of the Bible?
Probably. You do have the books of Adam and Eve, and some people think that Moses took that information with him on the ark also. So the books of Adam and Eve would even be a little older. But what we don't know about the books of Adam and Eve is how much of that was passed on and not really written down till much later. And the books of Adam and Eve are not as detailed as Enoch. And so Noah and his sons could very well pass on the stories of Adam and Eve, and then later got written down. But Enoch, all this stuff was written down. He told his son to write all this stuff down.
So they knew how to write, and they had paper and an alphabet.
Yes.
And this is the largest book of the Bible, the longest one.
Oh, I don't know about that. I guess it could be.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of, you got to remember, a lot of that, what you hold in your hand, is commentaries.
Oh, okay.
So you erase all the commentaries and just the actual words of the book of Enoch, it wouldn't be near as big as it appears to be.
Yeah, two questions. First, the sons of Edom, that's the sons of Esau, correct?
Right.
So who would would that be the Arabian people today?
Esau?
Yeah.
Well, Esau would be the ones that settled, Arabia, but mostly in Moab, Edom, and Ammon area.
Okay.
That would be more the sons of Esau. Most Arabians would have come from the sons of Ishmael.
Oh, of Ishmael, okay.
Right.
Yeah, which would have been, Ishmael.
Yeah, it would have been Ishmael.
Okay, I was kind of wondering. Yeah, it's interesting. That's from Jacob, Esau, and yeah, but there are always problems there between. Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Well,
I
you
would
got
have thought that.
you got to remember too that Esau or Ishmael was promised 7 nations. When him and Hagar fled from Abraham, and she thought they're going to die of thirst.
Yeah.
And then God brought forth water and promised Hagar her son would be the father of 12 nations.
Okay.
And then so a lot of those nations would be the Arab nations today.
I see.
But
Okay.
also the fact that during that time there were already a lot of inhabitants, in Arabia from other nations and stuff like that. So he wasn't the sole person of the Arabian people.
Okay, so it's like a general statement that it could mean
Yeah,
all kinds of. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Because remember, Abraham came from Ur,
Mhm.
and in that land of the Babylonians, stuff like that. He came from there, so it's very possible that many other, because the Tower of Babel and all the people that got scattered from the Tower of Babel, they were scattered all over the world. That would be included probably in Arabia too.
Okay.
But Ishmael himself would be the father of many of those nations in Arabia area.
Yeah, that'll explain a lot.
Yeah.
Definitely does. And the second thing is, I think in the book of Enoch, to me, he might have explained this dark energy matter thing. Have you ever heard about that theory?
I've heard of it, yeah.
See, what they're saying is that the Milky Way galaxy, which is 120,000 light years across, the center is spinning as fast as the outer peripheral edge. Now, physics, that doesn't make sense. It should be flying apart.
Right.
But it's not. There's got to be something a lot bigger. Well, we call it the dark energy. No, it's the angels.
Yeah.
They're keeping it together.
Yeah.
So they think it expands way far out of what you can see in the natural, but it's not that at all. And we know it's by the power of God. It keeps these things together. Hebrews, the first chapter. But this nails it to angels given authority to keep things in check. That's
And
what
they
it's
do.
telling me.
I agree with that.
That's kind of cool.
That is cool.
So they spend billions of dollars on this and super colliders and, what can I say?
God is in control with his angels and all this stuff. But, you just think about the atom itself. How fast those electrons and protons, faster than the speed of light, are going around that nucleus. What keeps them from just flying apart? What keeps them from flying apart? Who is controlling the very atoms that every element on the earth is made of that keeps them together like this? God does. God keeps them together. Right. And that's why you wonder why he gets mad and gets jealous about worshiping other gods? Because they didn't do that. He did that.
Oh, I call it high-class pantheism, all of that.
Yeah.
High-class pantheism, the worshiping the creation.
Right. I like the way Isaiah talks about it. It says, you create an image, you give it a face, you give it arms, you give it legs, but you got to carry it everywhere you go. Then you got to sit it on the mantle somewhere, and then you bow down to worship this thing that cannot even speak, it cannot reach out, it cannot walk, it's carried everywhere you go, and you treat it as a god. So God is telling the people, what is the matter with you? That you worship these images that can neither speak, walk, or talk. Yeah. But man is nuts. They want to worship idols instead of being obedient to God. And we do that today too. There's nothing new under the sun. It just takes a little different form sometimes, but it's very much the same today. I took off. That's right.
It doesn't happen all the time, but it just has to really believe that he's helpful.
Yeah. God has given us a tremendous amount of authority, and Satan is the one who wants to baffle us and fool us that we have no power, we have no authority. Yeah. Yeah. And we have the authority. There's certain things we can't not do because God has already set it in motion. Like you cannot bind Satan. You cannot throw Satan in the pit of hell. God's using Satan. So by his orders, we cannot destroy Satan or throw him in the pit of any sort. But we can do an awful lot by the authorities we have, including against animals and insects and even demonic forces. We have a lot of... Yeah. Right.
I mean, sometimes I could even look at them and it's like,
Yeah. Yep. Yep, I agree. And we just have to remember we have that authority, and we have to understand that because the Holy Spirit is in us, and so greater is he that is in us and he that's in the world concept, that we do have authority. Yeah. Well, you got to be operating in the perfect will of God. That's for sure. Okay, folks, we're done for this week. Next week, same time, same station, same bat channel, I guess. And we'll do this again next week.